after the dust had settled in Marquesa, you and I were standing there and the ring was gone.
Pure exhaustion.
Pure exhaustion. There really wasn't a moment where we got to go dump Gatorade on each other because the way that we had set up our arrangement with the building was that we actually had to stay behind and mop up the hall, put away the chairs, and clean up all the garbage. So while there was this euphoria that we had pulled off this show that pretty much went off without a hitch, I like to think, we had to stick around and play janitor.
Yeah, we were janitors for like an hour after the show. Now, this is our first show, right? And as you guys heard in the last episode, we're already having trouble like recruiting actual veteran workers on the show. So let me tell you, there was not a army of young boys ready to impress to help us out. It was probably our longest cleanup.
Yeah, I remember coming home reeking of bleach and yeah, because we had to clean up all the garbage, haul out the trash, break down the chairs, and so I think it definitely gave Biss and I some time to talk. I think my initial reaction internally was, well, fuck, that worked. Now we have to do it again, and next month. Biss, what was your reaction?
Yeah, I was in shock that people showed up.
I remember you saying that, and I remember being pissed at you. you were like, bro, I thought we were going to get like 30 people.
Yeah. No, you never know. And, even guys that have run for a long time always talk about that show where all of a sudden nobody's in the building and you're looking around going, what the fuck did we do wrong, right? So, I was ready for that first show out. I mean, you look at some of more successful companies, some of their first shows, there's not a whole lot of people in that crowd. So,
we based on what a lot of other veteran promoters had told me, we pretty much knocked it out of the park in terms of attendance and in terms of just running a relatively smooth show. I think the only thing that didn't run according to plan was how well the show came across in our media.
God.
Yeah, the first show, I think, how did you describe it looking?
Oh, and that was the second show. The first show I won't even watch.
Yeah.
It's god awful. It looks like security cam footage, You
said it was like looking at footage shot through a fish tank?
Yeah. So, and that's even the second one where we improved a little bit. It looked like an old tube TV underwater and looking at it through the glass of a submarine. Like it just.
And it's stationary. There's no action to it, really.
There's at least 2 hard cams on the second one, and we at least used a moving hard cam for the first 2 shows, which at least you don't lose the action when it goes out of frame. But I guess it was a mess. So I don't want to focus too much on the foibles. But anyway. So initially, I think I was not supposed to be the booker. I was supposed to be a guy that just kind of gave you notes on the cards. But since I kind of took the bull by the horns with this particular card, I became acutely aware that I couldn't really drop the ball. Fortunately, as we had discussed previously, I'm super big into long-term booking. And a lot of the guys told me that long-term booking on an indie level couldn't be done. But it was my goal to do the best that I could. And one of the things that I really love about wrestling in terms of, producing a show is that you do have to roll with the changes. People get injured. Folks get signed. And so you kind of have to create what Biss coined as the audible. And I thought I actually became quite good at that. I hopefully he'll back it up, but we began to call them happy accidents as well, where somebody would get hurt or somebody wouldn't be available, and so we'd have to shift gears and change the story. But that, to me, was one of the things that I really enjoyed about booking pro wrestling, which I think made Biss want to vomit a lot. Nah, not so much. But I did not, of course, coin the term audible. Very, very old school football term, but
That was funny. I remember
in the context of wrestling, I've never heard it used before.
But I remember when I was like, yeah, man, just nod one. You're like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, yeah, that's when this happens and you got to do something else. I always say, man, like, there's two sides of it. The long-term booking, you're a writer at that point, right?
Yeah.
That's a writer. A booker is somebody that can make those changes on the fly, right? That's what really makes you a booker, is when you show up day of and you get handed that shit sandwich and you make it fucking work, right? Mm-hmm. So I think we were in a good spot because when we first met, and until recently I went back and watched these shows, and I started to realize exactly how much we had on paper to start with. Mm-hmm. I want to say we had a good 6-7 shows.
We knew what we wanted to do for the first year. I was really happy that you entertained that. I personally think that while there are some people, I'll just go ahead and say it. Most wrestlers, when they come up to me, they go, "Where are you going with this, brother?" And then you'll give them an outline, and they'll either shit on it or they'll be happy with it. I typically find that most wrestlers work better when they know where they're going, and it motivates them, I think, to put on their best game face.
Yeah. That's true. There's also an aspect of it where wrestlers hate creative no matter what. Like, we've talked about it. We've been like, man, we get all this shit for this, but then, like, you're at Podunk Show fucking 36 in the middle of nowhere, right? And what you're doing makes absolutely no sense, and you don't say a word, right? You just take your payday and go. So that part gets very frustrating.
Yeah, I remember Matthew Palmer, who would later join us with the company, was kind of paying attention to what we were doing, and he told me that not everything needed to have a story or a purpose, and he said that sometimes you could just have wrestling for the sake of wrestling. And I saw that at a lot of these country bumpkin type shows and even shows in San Antonio. And to me, it was boring. And I personally feel that wrestling with context is wrestling at its height. When you have context and you're building history. And I think the first year was really, when we sat down, we decided we want to build a world.
Oh, man. Before we jump into that, part of the reason that I was able to support you on this is actually a battle that I had in Houston when I was helping book in Houston. I went in, the people that were there then, Tugboat Taylor in particular, and Chaz Taylor, who was quote unquote booking, for lack of a better term, had told me the exact same thing. Like, in independent wrestling, you can't do long-term booking. Like, you just can't do it. Like, well, fucking why? You have the same fucking 14 people showing up here every fucking show. They're mostly your students. Of course you can. And I think I lasted 3 months there because they were not the most organized people on the planet, and it became extremely... I actually woke up one night, covered half of my face in blood from like a stress nosebleed from just interacting with that company, and like that was the beginning of the end. The next show they did something stupid, and it was just like, I'm not coming back. But I had been down that road before, so I knew that progress could be made if we just kept our nose to the grindstone and pushed forward. But yeah, as we get into these next couple of shows, I think the universe building that we did was really something that wasn't being done in other places and really set us apart. So I think that was great, kind of like pulling from your writing background and putting it into a wrestling world worked out really well. So
there are a few things that I want to go into before we tackle Wired for War, Inspire Pro's second foray into live event hood.
You mean live pro wrestling, right?
Live pro wrestling. So one of the first complaints that we fielded, and it was probably one of the only complaints that we really had regarding the show, was the lack of women. And this is something that I need to address. We didn't have any women's matches on the first show,
And that was very intentional on my part. It wasn't. It didn't come from a discriminatory nature, but it had a lot to do with the fact that I saw a lot of women's wrestling presented all throughout Texas as a special attraction, added to shows, and I wanted to, if we were going to present women's wrestling, show people that it could be phenomenal. You know, Biss is a women's wrestling lover. And at that point in time, there were maybe like 4 women who were really great in the Texas wrestling scene. And of course, it has since then exploded. There are so many more women who are just killing it out there on Texas's indie scene. But at the time, there weren't really enough women to build a division around.
Yeah. Well, and also, I mean, we talked about on the first episode, you know, that we kind of got painted as a spiteful company, right? We were running in spite of anarchy. The women's wrestling was kind of a staple of anarchy, and that was a part of the reason why I stayed away from it. You know, we didn't want to be viewed as trying to do anarchy over again, even though that's how people try to paint us. You know, so that was another case where we were off on our own foot trying to do our own thing, you know?
That too, but also I just wanted to, if we were going to present women's graps, I wanted to make sure that it was quality, and I wanted to make sure that it was something that basically I initially envisioned, if we were going to do any women's stuff, I wanted to push it toward mixing genders. Yeah. And that wasn't something that Biss...
Nope, not something I like. Right? Right. Well, let's talk about it, right? That's a philosophy difference that we've had, right?
Yeah.
And people that know the product now know where we are. But yeah, it's my view on it has been, and we have found a way to do it without this being the case. But my view is you can't... Doing intergender wrestling alone isn't enough to say that the girls are on the same footing as the boys, right? To me, really putting them on the same footing is giving them the same focus creatively, then letting their matches sit on the card related to how hard they work and how much they're getting over. Now, we found a way to do that by integrating the genders, and I'm very proud of that. But the idea of, oh yeah, man, if I put the women's wrestler in there with a guy and, you know, she holds her own, then they're even.
Which is not even really what we wound up doing. I think my psychology was that I wanted to present women as not women, just other competitors.
As wrestlers. Right?
Yeah, and a lot of the issue that a lot of people have with intergender is the size difference. But I think you look at somebody like, say, Bruce Lee, who is like the poster boy for fighting science, and really pro wrestling is about fighting science, fighting style. And if you are if you have, like, you know, that fighting acumen, that spirit, that knowledge, that science in your head, even the smallest person can overcome a Goliath. I mean, some of the greatest pro wrestling stories ever are David versus Goliath stories. But anyway, I'm gonna kind of move on from this. Yeah. But I can say that right now, kind of drifting back into talking about Brandon Stroud, he was a guy that was really pushing for women's wrestling in the company, and I think that's kind of where he saw his end. And I think that this is probably the show where he began to, and I'm just going to flat out say it, manipulating people within the company to achieve what he was what he wanted to get over in the company.
Yeah, this was definitely the first step. And then you'll start to really see it into show 3. And then I go on a tirade when we get to show 4.
Yeah. I think, so 2 more things I got to address. Mr. Sistine.
Oh boy.
So, at the first show, we had a guy planted in the audience who was his name was Bryce. I don't remember his.
Yeah, he was a friend of Josh's.
Josh Montgomery, who was owner of the company. Josh.
He was a friend of Josh's who was a professional wrestler.
Yeah.
He was trained by the group up in Graham, Texas.
Despite the fact that I believe a few people took umbrage to the fact that he was in the company. People said he was not trained. He was trained.
He was.
Anyway, so we had this character by the name of Mr. Sistine, who was planted in the audience at the first show, and he wore a black suit, and he took notes, and his whole thing was he would just talk shit on the wrestlers and their gear, and he was very fixated on gear. And his initial gimmick was very much like he was the Mr. Blackwell of professional wrestling. He was critiquing gear, and in fact, we would give him notes. We would, kind of pepper in jokes, and he would scream things about people just having really shitty trash bag gear.
Yeah.
And this was going somewhere, but I neglected to mention that. But this is, I believe, something that continues on this show where he is in the audience screaming at people, and I think he even gets on commentary.
Yeah, I think he was in the crowd the first show, commentary the second show. Yeah. I did not like this. I didn't get it. It's not my alley of humor. But yeah, I never liked this.
Biss can bellyache and bitch all he wants, but the fact of the matter is that the payoff was great, and I think it's undeniable. And people still talk about it today, but we'll get to the payoff at a later point. But yeah, Mr. Sistine is loud and proud here. We also have to talk about Josh Montgomery, who was one of the owners of the company. Yes. Basically gave up filming the show in the middle of the show due to technical difficulties.
Yeah.
And we got to mention this because Josh was clutch for a lot of reasons. Josh invested in the company. He also made sure that every show was insured, which is something that a lot of people in wrestling don't often do. They don't insure their events, but
especially at this time in the date, right?
Yeah.
2013. A lot of people may say they were, but man, there wasn't a lot of people hitting up fucking event insurance. I can tell you that.
No. This was the show where afterward Josh transitioned to being our live sound man, who was in charge of cues and was behind the board and sat there with the commentators and had a hand in that stuff technically as well. I think Josh was initially bitter about being moved to that position. However, he excelled at it, and honestly, when you're the guy that's got to make sure that Stone Cold's glass breaking is on cue, you become very clutch, very important, and he did a great job of it. And he definitely was really important and kind of hard to replace. It took us a long time once he moved out of the company.
I have seen many matches ruined because someone has played the winner's music before the end of the match. As crazy as that is to think about, right? So the sound guy is a extremely important position. It's one of those that you don't notice until they fuck up. But yeah, it's one of the most important staff positions that you have at a show.
Absolutely. So okay, well let's you have anything to say before we leap into?
Let's touch on Jack Armstrong.
Oh,
we spoke about the ring getting pulled literally 2 days before our show.
Yeah.
So Jack Armstrong and his family, literally his family, came in the clutch and have been our ring crew since that first show. I can think of only like a handful of one-off promotional times that we ran wrestling that they were not there to set up the ring. So Jack used to run a wrestling promotion kind of in the outskirts of San Antonio. And he owns a ring that he rents out. He had recently rented out to Southern Championship Wrestling. He was also contracted at one point to tour with the Micro Championship Wrestling or the Extreme Midget Brawlers,
wrestling,
whatever it is. So Jack has, to this day, constantly told me that if I ever need a little person, that's probably not the term he used, but, that he could get a hold of that for me. So, hey, one of those things that I've never taken advantage of. But, yeah, they have been there since day one, and they literally built the stage for us. So I wanted to make sure I shouted out Jack.
Absolutely. They are wonderful people. I think, honestly, Jack Armstrong and his his family really gave me a strong sense of community when I first came into this thing. Jack's been ultimately kind toward my children. He was always kind to me, and he always made. I always look forward to seeing him.
Yeah.
Shows oftentimes for me feel like mini family reunions, and he's definitely one of the reasons why.
Yeah. The first face that we see after 20 and 30 minutes, going, oh shit, where's Jack at? He was supposed to be here 20 minutes ago.
Yeah. But anyway, okay, so the show ends, we mop up the hall, and we already kind of know where we're going, and we begin to cobble together the second show. I think a lot of people, including maybe even Biss, thought that we weren't coming. There was a potential that we were not going to do another show. So the idea that, we kind of flew through the flames and came out the other end, and people were excited about the next one was heartening.
Yeah. I still had my wristwatch on.
Yeah.
We paid everyone what we agreed to pay them on the first show, so that's a plus, right? I'm sure people have heard horror stories of promoters, and if you haven't, this happens. They bring in a bunch of people, agree to a certain fee, and then can't pay it, and then they slip out the back door. So I didn't have to slip out the back door and leave Max to fend for himself, so that was good.
Yeah, I will say this. I got a lot of shit about never lacing up a pair of boots. I had people telling me that I didn't belong in a wrestling company. That I think there was one notable person who said that it was a shame that I had any modicum of influence over the Texas wrestling scene. One guy I do want to give a shout out to, though, is a fellow by the name of Jax Dane. And Jax publicly said, while people were dogging me, he asked the question, are people getting paid? And the answer was yeah. And then he said, were people at the show? And everybody had to say yeah. And Jack said, then he's a wrestling promoter and you need to shut up and show him some respect. And because of him, I found it a lot easier to maneuver going forward.
Yeah, Jax was a sweetheart.
We've had our differences here or there, but that's under the bridge at this point.
And we'll talk about one on this show. But overall, Jax is a sweetheart of a guy.
Anyway, is there anything you want to say before we launch into that second day we walked into Marquesa?
I wish that I could false start this like 3 times to build up hype, but let's just jump into it.
Yeah.
One thing I would like to start that helped us out in the early days, we had Rachel Summerlin on color commentary for the first couple shows.
Oh, yeah.
And that really kind of helped guide Eamon, who was new to commentary, through that and to get him going. So that was a huge benefit. Rachel was basically my wrestling mom, so it was cool to me to have her there, seeing what was going on and giving tips here and there.
And here's a bit of dirt. This goes back to Stroud. I loved Rachel, and I admire her a whole lot. But at the time, this is like in retrospect, I realized Brandon was a part of his manipulation, was that he would tell me that Rachel hated me and that I shouldn't be booking a company. He said that she said that. And so I was ultimately kind of wary initially, being around her because I had all these people telling me like, we hate you, bro.
Yeah.
So it was tough. I wish she were still around because she was, all that other stuff aside, a delight to be around, and she has a really great mind for wrestling.
Yeah, and that was something that we weren't aware was going on, but man, looking back, how much like those little things that he would drop just disrupted what could have been a much smoother process.
I have a question before we start. When do you find it pivotal that I bring up Papa Domino?
Let's do it now.
Okay.
Let's do it now. Because that was pretty early. Well, it was pretty early.
The Papa Domino thing, too, got me heat. And so
it did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Anyway.
I think... go ahead and explain it, and then I'll kind of preface it of why it would have generated you heat, even though that's not where it was coming from.
Well, I also think that I've been proven that this concept held water and has been successful.
Just a little bit, yeah.
So there's a wrestler that I used to see regularly in ACW, by the name of Killa Cash, Yule. And for the majority of his time in the ring there, he was a heel, and he had some moments that I wouldn't quite say he should be proud of in that ring.
So he wrestled fucking Slim Sexy for 20 fucking minutes in a match that was supposed to be like 10, that I pulled my fucking hair out, that people still talk about to this day.
He also had his pants fall down around his ankles accidentally in one match. It might have been that match, actually. Yeah. It was just a train wreck. Now the thing is that I always thought Yule had something. I think he has a great deal of charisma, and he has a unique look. He has a great voice. But whenever I would actually meet him outside of the shows, there was just something really ultimately kind about him, and I felt like I really wanted to cheer for him, but that's not the character that was being pushed on us. But I just didn't think that he responded to also the crowd well. I think a lot of the times, sometimes the responses kind of bugged him. Anyway, Yule was one of the guys that people said, you should do something with this guy. What would you do for Yule? And so I had this idea of, I'm going to take this guy and make him the most over fucking guy in all of Texas wrestling. And I had this idea of creating a character by the name of Papa Domino. And Papa Domino was going to be a pizza delivery guy in the classic Domino's style windbreaker who would come out with several pizzas and hand out pizza slices to the audience, and then get in the ring and of course wrestle, but he'd have like some finishing move called the pizza cutter, like a diamond cutter, something absurd like that. And I thought that this would get him over like gangbusters. And a lot of people thought that I was actually making fun of Yule, but I really wasn't.
I think part of the character pitch was, right, to not wear trunks, right, and to kind of wear something that was more flattering.
Yeah.
And I think you approached that in a way that you would through acting, or like a director would talk to an actor, and it was like a shock to a wrestling system, right? Like, who's this guy talking about physiques? All we do is talk about physiques.
Well, I never mentioned his physique to him.
Yeah. I think that's how it got spun, right?
Well, that's because Thomas Munoz said something like that to Albert.
Yeah, and to Darren.
I didn't mention his physique.
Yeah. And but there's the ball rolling, right?
Yeah.
So now, instead of approaching this from a neutral position, he's already had these guys in his ears, right? And it's already been tainted. They just basically built it up as it was us making fun of him, and that couldn't be further from the case.
So the one thing I guess I will say is that I talked to Yule about it. I made the pitch, and initially he was game.
Yeah.
And we were going to film a vignette out on my street where he was going to basically deliver a pizza and then go back to his car and count the money, and then some guy in a ski mask was going to like try and rob him, and then he was going to beat the hell out of the guy in the ski mask and go, "Hi, I'm Papa Domino, and it's hard out here on the streets. This is not an easy job." And then we'd use that to kind of build him up. And I bought the gear. That's another thing I need to mention.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I bought the gear. He had like a hat, and he had like a windbreaker, and he was going to provide some of the other components. And then before he was going to debut, he told me he didn't want to do it. He backed out. Yeah. And then he tried to make some other pitch, and I said, "Well, I just invested in this, and if this is the way it's going to go, I gotta second think about all this shit." But I will say that I didn't do this to put him down. It was intended to be a fun gimmick. I will say that he was getting a lot of shit at shows, though, for the bikini trunk thing.
Yeah.
His physique is a little bit different than, like, he's not like, Yule's not he's not like ACH or Chandler Hopkins.
He's a 6'7" fucking.
Yeah. He's not. His body type is different, and I did say I didn't I didn't call him out on having a bad physique, which was what people said I said. I never said that, so I need to clarify that.
Yeah.
But since then, there is a wrestler who works for our company, and he also works at another company called Party World Wrestling, by the name of Luigi Primo.
Yeah. Over like gangbusters.
Hugely over like gangbusters.
Anyone listening to this knows exactly who Luigi Primo is, so
Yeah.
like, we don't even have to explain it.
Luigi Primo is currently the Inspire Pro champion, in fact.
Yeah.
And I can say that when he won that title, one of the most just chilling, electrifying moments ever of all time. And in some ways, I felt vindicated, but still, I wish we'd been able to do that gimmick.
One of my favorite moments was when that happened. You was at that show. You remember that? He was just visiting, but like, actually, he may have been on that card. Was he in a battle? I don't know. We'll get to that later. That's down the road, folks. But yeah, I remember nudging him and being like, "Bro, that could have been you. Like, we could have done this." But is what it is. And at a heavy metal show, he actually tagged with Luigi Primo as Papa Domino at least one time.
Yeah, which actually kind of pissed me off.
Did it? I told him to do it.
Yeah, but that still pissed me off. Yeah. Like, call me and, if I'm going to catch heat for concocting something and then you're just going to appropriate it, and, I still suffered because of that.
Yeah. I thought
people are going to go, "Oh, you suffered." No, fuck you, man. People wanted to kick my ass, so.
Yeah, but that was to me, that was vindication for you. That was concrete smoking gun vindication.
Yeah, well, still, I hold grudges.
Yeah, let it go, man.
Yeah, fuck you. Anyway, I think the one thing I will say, though, is that Papa Domino and even the Great Depression gimmick, these were gimmicks that were super cartoony in a lot of people's eyes. And a lot of people see gimmicks like that as not being able to be considered seriously. I will say that gimmicks like Depression and even Papa Domino and even the Sistine gimmick were gimmicks that I wanted to push, that seemed silly, that seemed cartoonish, but that I wanted to give legs to. I still think the cartoon character can have massive moments of triumph and can have really fairly good dramatic moments. And, I'm going to continue to do stuff like that. We always have in the company.
2 out of 3 ain't bad, brother.
I don't know what that means, but
I'm shitting on Sistine again. One other character, as I move by, before you can rebuttal that, that we didn't address from the first show was Gregory Simons.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Gregory Simons, who was kind of retired at the time, wasn't he?
Yeah, he had his retirement match. I want to say he wrestled Albert.
He did. He wrestled Albert. He wrestled Albert, ACH. And ACW, and it was his farewell match. Gregory Simons, I have to say, is one of the most positive and supportive people that I've ever met in my life. And while he wasn't able to wrestle at that point in his career, and I knew that he still wanted to be around the business, but also he was like one of those people where I was like, I want this guy in my locker room.
Yeah, so he's on my top 5 like best people in wrestling, at least as far as positivity.
He just he radiates sunshine, and so we introduced him at the first show as kind of our GM.
Yeah, we needed a figurehead.
Yeah, Biss kind of slipped into that role over time after Simons left. But yeah, Gregory was. We had plans for Gregory, but things changed as they often do.
Card subject to change.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's jump into this first show, man.
Okay.
So, in a weird thing that I used to hate about shows, and we did, and this one I thought came off really well. We started with a promo. Mm-hmm. We started with Greg Simons in the ring, and Jojo Bravo came out to address Jordan Jensen attacking him on the previous show.
Yeah.
So, anything you want to go into there? Or?
Not really. I do think that this segment personally for me dragged a bit, and it was definitely learning. This was part of the learning curve for me, where I decided from that point on, no, we need to start with action, because people come here not to watch people talk, but to see people wrestle.
Yeah.
And so from that point on, I decided, no, I think if I were going to do this, I would have done this like after the first match.
Yeah.
Like as a bit of a cool down.
We needed it to set up our first match, but we could have kept it more concise, I think.
I could have arranged, I could have shuffled the deck a bit to make it work, no matter what.
So JoJo is addressing his grievance with Jordan Jensen, who debuted by attacking him at the last show. Jordan comes out and basically is like, let's just fight right here, and then we can be over with it. And I think says something along the lines of like Vegas sucks and that Jensen should be in his spot. And Greg Simons basically says, well, if you want in that tournament, you're going to have to earn it, and you're going to face this gentleman. So our first match is Jordan Jensen versus the debuting JT LaMotta.
Yeah.
So, what were your thoughts of JT LaMotta at the time? Because I think that's a real good way to start into the story of JT LaMotta.
I always thought JT was a superlative wrestler. I thought he was really, really talented. I know you're kind of tapping into my relationship with him as a fan a bit, where I mean, there was a period where I was pretty vocal about how much I hated him, but that was because I felt like he was being shoved down our throats, and he was portrayed as almost just like this goody two shoes type character. It was just a bit much, but I felt like JT was an excellent heel character.
So this is a lesson that I learned before Inspire, and it's something that I keep in mind. Thank God, I haven't really had to deal with this lesson through Inspire because we've run exclusively in Austin.
Yeah.
I don't think we've run a single thing outside of Austin.
Why bother?
So, JT LaMotta in 2006 was easily the best, work rate guy in Texas. And by 2007 was kind of like the flag bearer for the state of Texas. He was the guy that would wrestle the top work rate guys when they came in.
He'd make my head spin. He was great.
Yeah.
I will say that at least.
Yeah. So this is all part of his, ascend. So he was the guy that, your average promoter would put in the opening match because he wrestles fast, and that's what you put in the opening match. So the fans had watched him build up from that to now he's wrestling the top work rate guys from around the country, and finally he had built his way up and he had won the main title in San Antonio. And then shortly towards the end of his reign, we moved the focus of the shows to Austin. So those fans never saw the climb. They just saw this guy on top, right? So that was a lesson that I learned, that you have to focus on the crowds. You can't just assume that the crowd has seen everything. If you move, locations by more than 100 miles, those fans are going to jump in there. So it's something I've always kept in the back of my mind, and it's something that I always kind of am constantly evaluating. For us, it only came in when we would move venues, and it was just kind of a quick check, and everything usually worked out. But so at this point, JT was winding down his career.
Yeah.
And he was somebody that I really enjoyed working with. He basically, I think at this point, had his final couple matches planned out. And this is a true wrestling retirement. But basically had his final couple matches planned out. And I think the idea was he would wrestle 2 matches for us, and then he would finish up his career at ACW. So we had that, and so he comes in, he wrestles Jordan Jensen. Now I've pulled back the fucking curtain, so the creative kind of gets lost in this. But Jensen wins when Dalton runs out, and helps Jensen win, kind of forming an alliance between those two. And
also, I think, playing with some history between Dalton and
Yep.
JT LaMotta that existed. I one of the things that I was really keen on doing was exploring history that previously existed between wrestlers. And one thing that people were critical about behind the scenes was like, bro, you can't assume that anybody's fucking seen this, blah, 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 blah. But the thing is that I wasn't just trying to dig up Texas wrestling or exploit it. A lot of the time when I reintroduced these connections between people is because I knew that these people had chemistry and they had the ability to put on really phenomenal barn burner type matches. It was just basically, in some ways, giving these guys context to do what they did great and work with one another. And a lot of the time when someone like, say, Dalton would come in, you'd ask him, well, who do you want to work with? Which is one of the questions I basically ask. They would say, I want to work with XYZ. And so that's what you set up.
Yeah. See, to me, too, all right. So if someone's never seen any of it before, and they just come into this, they understand why those two are fighting. If they do dig a little deeper, they're going to find answers that still point to this happening and being logical. So, like, it's just, to me, it's not a good reason not to at least tip a hat, at the very least, to previous history.
Pro wrestling is like the Highlander, man. I mean, people are running at each other with swords and trying to be the one. These people have relationships, histories, feuds that extend across the state, across the country. And you know what? If there are 4 or 5 people in my book who are at the show who get the nod, to me, that's worth it, because I think a lot of the times that creates an enthusiasm that spreads through the crowd.
Hey, brother, Marvel needs to stop putting those Easter eggs in movies, because maybe not everybody gets them. Get the fuck out of here, right?
Exactly.
Okay. So, Jordan Jensen and JT LaMotta, to me, and I was a guy that pushed for Jensen very hard from the beginning. This was where the cracks started to show. This was originally chalked up to, maybe he just struggled to keep up with LaMotta, but in-ring wise, there were some little moments where some red flags were raised as far as performance-wise, if he would be able to keep up to the level that we had talked about originally.
Yeah. Beforehand, I think there was a period where Jensen looked phenomenal in terms of his physique and conditioning.
Yeah.
But when he came in, I feel like maybe he just wasn't where he was, or what I was previously familiar with.
Yeah, and I think clearly he had basically been blackballed from wrestling, so I think there was maybe some, not mental health issues, but definitely gone through a down period, right?
Yeah.
So,
but anyway, that gets Jensen into the, he gets him into the company, basically. Yeah. He was not technically a contracted worker, but that storyline wise, that's how we brought him in.
And now we have him in the fold. We still have a story with him and JoJo, and we now have him involved with the title tournament due to his win here.
And there's an alliance with Dalton in some way.
Yes. The 9 Inch Males, I believe.
Yes.
Jesus fucking Christ.
Yeah, the 9 Inch Males. I'm a guy that is big on alliances and factions. Not everybody is super into that, but me personally, I think it is likely that when you have people of dubious character, that they will rely on connections to help them, climb the ladder, so to speak. And of course, by nature, people need other people to have their backs. It's like a disease,
It's the unit system.
Yeah,
like the 20 count on the outside and some of the other stuff we do. We're clearly influenced by New Japan Pro Wrestling.
Yeah, so safety in numbers is a big storyline device that I love.
So we move on from that to the Great Depression versus Thomas Shire.
Okay. And
this is Depression's second match, right? So Depression wins with the eye claw. Shire is very goofy here.
Yeah. Shire is a really incredible guy. He's young at this point, and he'd had a mountain of experience. He'd been to Japan.
Yeah.
And he could go.
He was also at the same time having bangers with Masada in San Antonio.
Yeah. He's also one of the funniest people I've met in the business. No one makes me laugh like him, but I always felt like there were times where you would see glimmers of that, but not the whole enchilada. But then there were times where you just wanted him to be really kind of like a serious killer.
Yeah, that's not what we got here. I think this is what we thought we were getting here, but that's not exactly what we got from Shire in this match.
And of course the claw. This is the one. Depression's finisher was the Von Erich claw.
No, it was. So I stole this from Gary Hart. So when Gary Hart feuded with Fritz in Amarillo, Fritz had the head claw and Gary had the eye claw. So it was the battle of claws. And I didn't want to just take the head claw. So we went with the eye claw to where he's basically gouging his eye out. And I thought it fit, well with the burlap sack monster visual, right?
Penny is his manager. Penny Arcade.
Penny is still here.
Still here, screaming in French. She is over like gangbusters because she's just screaming in a foreign language and beating the mat the entire time.
Looked amazing too. She had the period clothing and
and so for me,
This is me building my serious monster. This is my my Kane, my Papa Shango in a way. But I never really intended him to be comedy. Later on, other people would try to kind of force him into comedic roles, and it really was not what I wanted for him. I wanted to have a character who would ultimately win titles and be a serious threat that I never really wanted to see defanged or turned into like a gag. Yeah. But this is the start of him building this streak, kind of.
So from there, we go into what was from the beginning one of the storylines that I wanted to push. This is the Dagger Brothers debut against Pump Patrol. The Dagger Brothers were two brothers who had just moved from Puerto Rico, matching gear, similar looks, and then
amazing chemistry.
Yeah, I mean they're brothers, right? They had been on the big Puerto Rico shows in Puerto Rico,
but legit, not storyline.
No,
Yeah.
They, so I think Kevin had moved here first. Mm-hmm. And then the other brother, and I can't think of his name, had just gotten to the stateside.
This was legit like one of those instances where you were really scouting people.
Yes.
Like, that's the, I give you tremendous due for always having your finger on the pulse of seeing guys that, were doing shows outside of Austin, and you'd be like, bro, you need to look at this.
Yeah. So these guys here, there was a tag feud that we really wanted to get them into. And next episode we'll go into kind of where that crashed and burned. But Dagger Brothers get the victory over Pump Patrol. Now Pump Patrol's a fun story too. This was the baby of Josh Montgomery.
Yeah, he wanted to create these characters who were kind of narcissistic gym rats, but also kind of goofy. Okay, so the Pump Patrol were basically these gym rat characters that Josh Montgomery came up with. Josh is actually a really funny guy, and him and I would oftentimes come up with fairly indecent or offensive gimmicks to hang on people, but they were always really fun and funny, and I always really enjoyed riffing with him. There were a few contributions to this particular gimmick that I had. I actually wrote a lot of the jokes that they would come up with. For example, one of the jokes was Jared Wayne would threaten to take people to Schlitterbronn, which is obviously like a bad pun. And of course, is this the show where they throw whey powder in someone's face? Okay, yeah, they used whey powder to throw in people's faces and take advantage of that, like in true heel fashion, though a little goofy.
They would come to the ring with like a cooler of like shakers or, like protein shakers or, I forget what the other thing was.
They would come to the ring. Well, one of the things that they would do is they would come to the ring and fat shame the audience and then throw out packages of baby carrots or like broccoli. And they would tell people that they live like shit and they need to get their acts together. Yeah. And they were very, they were loved, but people
loved to hate them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was Jared Wayne and AJ Summers. Jared was from New Orleans, from that school. And then AJ was from San Antonio and had not been treated particularly nice by that group. So it was a chance to give him something and really kind of show what he had.
But I do want to say that this was an exclusive Inspire thing, like this gimmick.
Yeah, for this show.
Well, no, it was born in our company. We spit polished this.
You and Josh basically fucking created this from the ground up.
Absolutely.
Fuck it. Let's go into it now.
No, let's wait.
We're gonna wait.
Let's wait for when they disappear.
Okay.
Because that's
so tune in for that one.
Yeah.
Because there'll be some ranting. Okay, so from that, this fucking match right here. So this is a good look into why we pull our hair out, right? So the original match, and it went back further than I remembered, was Alex Reigns versus Chris Cross. Was what this segment was supposed to be.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So Alex Reigns gets injured. Okay. So now we have to find a replacement for Alex Rains.
Yeah.
And so one of the people in my carload when I was traveling the state of Texas was Jacobs Pliskin. And for people that don't know Jacobs is extremely physically intimidating. Trained at FCW in Atlanta. Was mentored by Bob Holly, right?
A legit intimidating wrestler. There aren't a lot of wrestlers who I would not want to fuck with.
Yeah.
Okay? A lot of these guys have never been in a fist fight in their lives.
Yeah.
Okay? But there's a pocket of legitimate, intimidating, scary dudes, and I would put Jacobs on that short list. So when you were watching him, there was just this belief that maybe he was really killing people.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So the very short period of time that I was training to be a pro wrestler, I rolled around with Jacobs on multiple occasions. And Jacobs was extremely powerful. But Jacobs was a professional, right? There was never a point in time where Jacobs ever took advantage of me. I never saw Jacobs take advantage of anyone else during training.
And he'd also had a few cups of coffee in some notable places at this point in time. I feel like he had been to the mountain that a lot of people who aspire to reach it, he'd been there.
Jacobs was hard to deal with for one reason, because he had been to, WWE developmental, and he knew when an indie show was just bullshit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if you were just a random spot show and you tried to puff out your chest, he wasn't going to buy it. He'd had Bill DeMont fucking verbally abusing him, like he knew what the hierarchy was, right? But so Chris Cross gets cold feet.
I need to talk about this because I talked to Chris.
This is your side of it here.
Yeah. So Chris Cross, who was this young kind of Zac Efron looking fucker, who he was well conditioned, and he was okay in the ring, and he had a charisma. Was initially supposed to face Alex Rains. Alex gets injured, and so we decide we're going to pop the crowd by introducing Jacobs. And when I tell Chris that we're switching gears and we're going to be using Jacobs, he expresses that he is concerned that he is going to get killed by Jacobs. I don't know why, but he had this impression that Jacobs was a super stiff, unsafe worker, and so he decided that he didn't feel comfortable with it, and we have a long talk about it. And I say, look, this isn't going to happen. And I said, there's, you could probably benefit from working with Jacobs. Jacobs has been to places where you want to be, because at this point, Chris was saying, I want to be in the WWE. That's what he keeps, whistling at me. And I managed to kind of, I think, pep him up, and he agrees to do the match. Now, a few days before this, Chris calls me and tells me that he has torn a bicep, I think.
Yes, that's right.
And
pectoral.
Oh, pectoral. He tore a pectoral muscle and could not be at the show. And so we decide to put someone else in his place. But I got to say, that weekend, this dipshit kid, Chris Cross, this fucking... no integrity. I'm getting angry just thinking about this. This motherfucker starts posting gym selfies of himself after he told me that he tore a pectoral muscle.
One of which is doing the bench press.
Yeah. He's posting videos of himself bench pressing shit. And so I message him and go, I thought you said you were hurt, man. You didn't have to lie to me. And this guy, who is also uber Christian conservative, starts going, I don't have to listen to some guy that's never laced up a pair of boots. And so I fire back, aren't you this clean-cut Christian dude and you're lying to me? You're violating the commandments that you swear by very publicly, and you couldn't have even just told me you didn't feel comfortable. If you'd said no, I would have been fine with that. But the fact that you lied to me, fuck you. You're never coming back. Yeah. And that's how that ended.
So now we have Jacobs Pliskin versus Barrett Brown, right? Barrett Brown is a guy. So I will never work with somebody under the age of 18 if at all possible. if I'm aware that they're under that age. And it's my job to do that homework and know that stuff, right? So Barrett Brown was somebody, he started training when he was 16. So I would see him on these shows, and it was literally like the countdown to him turning 18. He was very much a prodigy at that time. Picked up wrestling very quick.
Incredible talent.
Yeah, so he'd been wrestling for a while, so it was very exciting that we got to have Barrett in and to work with Barrett on the show.
Yeah.
Because he was somebody I enjoyed working with. So now we have Barrett Brown and Jacobs Pliskin. So we get to the night before the show, and I am working 12 to 16-hour days at this point. In the middle of my shift, I get a call from Jacobs telling me that he's not coming the next day.
All right, I think we're going to stop right there and carry this over into the next episode.
Yeah.
But yeah, please tune in next time to hear the rest of what happened at Wired for War, because it got a little messy.
Yes.
But yeah, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.